Okay, I just did this video to show how to make a wafer paper sunflower with a wafer paper center, and I'm going to show you how to make the wafer paper centers now because this is so simple. It was really easy. It just has to have time to dry, that's all. So I would start with brown wafer paper, but if you don't have that, you can always make it in white or a different color and then brush it with some petal dust once you're done. Or you can use food coloring because this really is very hard. It's just hard as a rock when you're done with them, and it's easy to kind of, use a food coloring that ordinarily might melt it, but it's not going to happen. So take any flower center mold that you have. This one everybody has. I've seen this in a million places, being sold in different places. All right, so you want to cut the wafer paper that you're using, and I'm just using old scrap paper that's old and it's drying out. I'm not going to use it for anything. So you would use brown or yellow, whatever color you want the center to be. Just wet it and then press it into the mold, into the flower center former. And don't worry if it pops up, because it's going to pop up. You don't need it to be soaking wet. If it gets too wet, it's going to melt, and that's okay, but it's better if it kind of keeps its shape. And the circles that you're cutting out should be a little bit bigger than the size of the cavity that you're using. So you could use any of these. I used the smaller one here to make this one, and oops, it comes out, just a smaller flower. So you can do this for any types of centers if you're making, wafer paper daisies or whatever. Any flower that has a center that is flat, you can use this. Okay, so just keep layering, and you can do as many layers of this as you want, but I would do about 4 or 5 before you put the wire in, because you want it to be pretty thick and you don't want the wire to show through. It doesn't really matter if it's colored, what side you put, other than the first layer that's going to be on the outside. You want the color to be down, like, well, this is colored on both sides apparently, but once you get into the center, it doesn't really matter if the colored side is down or up. And as you're putting them on top of each other, just keep pressing it so that it's going to kind of take the shape of the mold. It's not really going to have that impression, but the point of putting it in here is just really more for the size than anything else. Okay. All right, so once you get, this is probably 6 or 7 layers because I kept talking while I was doing this. You're going to take your wire and bend it like an L first. I'll hold it up against my sweater. Bend it like an L, and then, or kind of hook it. You're going to make a hook, and then you're going to bend the hook so that the hook is flat like that, because this is what's going to sit on top of the flower in the center of it, and you want it to be kind of wide enough that it's going to grab onto the center and be sturdy enough that you can pick it up. So put that flat on there, and you're going to take another piece of wafer paper. That's probably going to fall over. That's okay. Wet another piece of wafer paper and slide it over the hook like that so that it grabs onto the hook. The hook is in between, it's in there, but it's in between the 2 pieces of paper, so it's pretty well attached. And you might want to do a couple more layers. The more you do on the back, the sturdier it's going to be, and the less likely it will be that the hook rips out. So I'll do one more. Obviously this does not have to be a precise circle. It just has to be large enough that it covers the space, and you want it to be wet all over, not soaking wet, but just damp enough that it's going to stick to itself. Okay, so now I've got this. Let me move this over here. Right there. All right. So I've got this, and I'm still pressing it down so that it's going to keep the shape of the little cavity. And I'm going to take some more water and put it on the inside and kind of the outside of the edge of the petal. I mean the paper. It's not a petal. And then I'm going to turn this over and kind of press it into the mold so that the outside edge sticks to the inside, but it keeps the shape of the cavity. Now, like I said, you're not going to get a tremendous amount of detail from this, but it will be the right size, and you will get some detail. Okay, so now I folded this over. The little hook is wiggling around. So I'm going to take maybe a couple more layers I'll just fold this in half and cut one more. This one I'm going to make smaller so that it fits inside that shape, because at this point you don't want anything sticking out. So let's attach these two together. Okay, and then I'm going to add one more layer on the back of this. So you have 5 or 6 layers that are going to be on the top of the center, and four or 5 on the back. It just depends on how strong you want this to be. When this dries, it's going to be pretty strong, and you'll be able to feel the little hook in there. I'll take this. The more paper you have on the back, the stronger that's going to be. And just cut that off. It's wafer paper, you can cut it. Alright, so once you're done, you can either leave that in the little cavity, or you usually can take it out. Now see, in this case the wire is showing through, so that's not necessarily great. I don't know if you guys can see, yeah, see right in the middle there, the wire is showing through, but that's okay because you can go back and paint it when you're done. And where this little edge is showing here, you could go back and just bring that down, fold it in toward the center. That was the little extra pieces that I put on, so I just made them a little too big. But that's okay because it's paper and you'll be able to cut it off. So either leave this in the shape like that, which is probably the best way to do it, just to keep it in one place while it dries. Let it dry. It's not going to take that long depending on what your humidity is. I made a couple of these yesterday and they only took about 20 minutes to dry. But it's really dry here right now. But that's how you do this, and when you're done, they firm up. They're hard. It's just layers and layers of wafer paper. It's the right shape, it's the right size, and you do get a little bit of the impression if you're close enough, but doing it in this is more just to get the size and the right shape. And it does give you a light center that wafer paper will attach to, so it's very good for doing the center of the flowers like that. I have cut out from this sheet of wafer paper that I printed a bunch of sunflower petals, and that you can just, you can do that, or you can just use regular yellow-orange kind of colored wafer paper, cut out some petal shapes. And since this is wafer paper, since the center is wafer paper, you can stick the wafer paper petals to it just using water. You don't need anything special. So what I've done here is I have a whole bunch of the petals that I've cut out. Oops, I have to turn them like this. I've cut them out and I've left a little white thing on the end so that you can moisten that with some water. Very simple. You don't need any special glue or anything since it's all wafer paper, and that sticks to water. And you're just going to start layering rows of petals on there. And if you look at a sunflower, they only really have 1 or 2 rows of petals. Now see, this one I've left 2 together, so I'm going to put that on and then cut it because it looks better when they're cut. They only really have like 2 or 3 rows of petals, and they're all about the same length. And it's not like there's rows and rows and rows of petals, so you really don't have to do too much to fill this out. But this is really, oops, just make sure you're sticking it in the right place because it wants to grab itself. There's that. And I've run out of petals, so I'm going to cut out some more. And again, you can just use regular yellow, kind of orangey yellow wafer paper. You don't need the printed petals. I guess I could list this in my shop if I wanted to, but you can just download this. If you have a picture of a sunflower and an edible ink printer, you can do it yourself. If you don't, I guess I'll just use the yellow paper. That's the easiest thing. Okay, and I'm leaving these in rows, so I'm not separating them all completely, just because it's big enough that I can do that. Maybe like that much of them I can do, and that'll probably layer when I apply it to the flower. The centers were really easy to make. I was surprised. I'd been thinking for a while that I wanted to try it, and I did that one and then this little one, and it's pretty. I just used kind of random white paper, but you can use any color paper, and I'll do I'll post both videos on how to do it. So look for the other one for the centers. All right, so just keep layering these. Let me put this one here. Try to fill in the spaces so that it stays a pretty round shape. And look online for pictures of sunflowers before you do this. I think that's usually the best way to make sure that you're making things that actually look like the flower that you want to make, as opposed to some random fantasy flower that doesn't really exist. But most people will see the round center, the large brown center, and the yellow petals, and they'll recognize this is a sunflower. Now this one I want to move like that. And I have one more. This is a little uneven, but you can always go in, since it's wafer paper, and just cut the petals so that they're shorter. But look how simple that was. It takes like 10 minutes to put that flower together at the most, except for the drying time for that. But very easy, very simple. You know what, I will list the wafer paper petals at some point, and I'll put the link on the video for that. So if you want to get flower petals to make your own flowers, then that's a good option, and it's very simple. Okay, so leave me any questions, and watch the other video showing how to make the centers, because it was very simple, and this makes them light and easy to attach the petals to. It's very easy.